This episode is sponsored in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. To get a free demo, check out the company's website at realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. Before we jump into this week's guest, I'd just like to make a quick plug for a new project I'm working on. It's a website called clinicaltrialconfidential.com. It's really right now just a forum where people can either register or post anonymously. Really, the idea is that I feel our industry lacks a certain amount of transparent and open conversation. So this is sort of my humble way of providing a forum where people can post anonymously, maybe open up the conversation. Either way, check it out. It's still evolving. It's clinicaltrialconfidential.com. All right, enough with that. Our guest this week is Doug Bain. Doug has been developing, implementing, and supporting clinical research systems since 1996 with a primary focus on EDC and DCT solutions. He was the founder and CEO/CTO of Clinpal, a DCT platform. Since 2019, Doug's been the CTO at KCR, a mid-sized global CRO. In this episode, we discuss why clinical trial systems are so siloed, platform overload at sites, the future of decentralized clinical trials, and the industry's reluctance to discuss their failures. I'm a big fan of this conversation. I really love going to Doug. Anything tech-related, he always has a really great insight on. So enjoy this episode. Without further ado, Doug Bain. All right, Doug, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Nice to be on.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking some time at what is probably the end of your workday, yeah?
4 o'clock. 4 o'clock in the UK. It's...
Man, by 4 o'clock, I'm already mentally checked out. So, again, I appreciate you coming on. So, I like to kind of start out every show the same, and I like to really hear a little about people's backstory, kind of how they got into clinical research. I think it's always fun, sometimes funny. People so often fall in accidentally, but then find something they love and persevere through the industry. So if you would, just sort of take us through your clinical research origin story, if you will.
Glad to. Well, I'm maybe slightly unusual in that my family was medical. My father was a heart surgeon. My mother was a midwife. My sister was a midwife. My brother is a vascular surgeon, but I am none of the above. So I got involved in computers early on, and I stuck to that. Although the first job I had was for my father. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he was fitting, at the time, Bjork Shiley heart valves, which became known for breaking, unfortunately, at the time. But I was working for a software development company, and we wrote a piece of software that I suppose in today's terms is called an EDC system. But at the back then, it wasn't called an EDC system. We were just writing the database to capture the data, which was post-surgery follow-up. So data was entered into that system, and that was my first exposure to a site environment, and first exposure to a study nurse who used to come in every Friday. Her name was Rose Rogers, I remember, and she would chase after the registrar saying, "What did you write down on this sheet? What did you write down on that sheet? And why did you say this and say that?" And then transposing that data into what wasn't called a case report form, but now I know is being a case report form, or an electronic case report form. And the data was stored for, long-term follow-up. So that was my first exposure to clinical trials a number of years back. But I then went off into doing regular software development. It was only after a number of years did I return and started working full-time in clinical trials, developing, as it turned out, a CTMS system followed by an EDC system for a small company called IBM. And that was interesting at the time. I didn't know anything about clinical trials really, apart from my short exposure working with my father. But then I decided this was better than writing accounting systems, and I've stuck to that field since. So primarily working in EDC systems, I have to say. I spent quite a long tenure at a company called Medidata, who are quite well known, working in some of their products. But back in 2010, I did feel that there was too much of a proliferation of technologies to the detriment of all stakeholders. And in particular, I felt that, the fact that you could ask a site to use 4 or 5 different systems wasn't translatable to a patient. A patient wasn't going to use 4 or 5 different systems. So I sort of felt this was a catalyst for change. The sponsors weren't particularly excited about changing because, well, I'll explain maybe in more detail, but the sponsors, the sponsors have developed over many years. They've got their silos and they buy systems into their silos. So they will have a department that are doing, biostats. They'll have a department for doing data management. They'll have a department for patient recruitment, and they'll blah, blah, blah. And each of these different departments used to have their own budgets and procure their own systems. And that resulted in some ways as these silos of systems. So you create your RFP for your different systems. You go out to market saying, right, we need an EDC system. We need a and this actually, funnily enough, I'm jumping ahead maybe a wee bit. After I felt the proliferation of systems was too much, I wanted to write a platform. One of the first mistakes I made was I found, I don't want to call it EDC because I'm not doing EDC. I'm doing data capture. So we're going to call it capture module. Nobody bought it because they were going, right, where's this acronym EDC? And what's the acronym EDC? Hold on. You capture patient for sites and you capture data for the patients and so on, but it's not EDC, so sorry, you're not on the RFP list. But it does help manifest this challenge we have is that, the silos are locked down, and trying to break out of these silos either as a sponsor or as you guys from the site perspective or from the vendors, it's very hard because people don't want to break out. They just want to be comfortable in their silo. But I think from a tech perspective, I felt that the right way to go back in 2010 was to support the patients, bring the patients into the bubble of the technology. Sponsors were working in the systems, and then the sponsors and sites were working in the systems, but the patients weren't really included. ePro is sort of, go and capture that please for me, but they weren't really in the bubble, of a clinical trial platform. And I felt that was the next stage to bring them in, to, factor in their involvement, to get their feedback in a controlled fashion, and to create, at the time the buzzword was patient centricity, but really to get more involvement from the patient with the site, as part of an overall team, So that's I worked on the systems called Clinpal. I worked on that for 7 years. And then most recently I've joined a CRO. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer of a CRO, KCR. So we're based around the world. We do oncology studies. Unusual company, coming up for about 1,000 staff, but almost you could call us a boutique. But 1,000 staff doesn't sound quite right for a boutique. But we take as almost like a family type approach to how we work with our clients, where we sit down, we say, right, this is what we do. Do you like it? Great. We'll work together. If it's not suitable for the skills we have, then we'll say that it's not for us. We'll move on. Which may be an old-fashioned approach, but seems to work for us.
Nice. I like that. And you touched on it a little bit. I mean, something that really interests me, and a lot of reason why, I liked the conversation we've had offline and kind of wanted to have you talk about here is that issue that sites see, is that sites being forced to use all these different systems. It's still a big problem, even in the highly discussed new DCT world in which we live. I mean, are you saying, is that really just a matter of, as you alluded to before, just siloing without any real regard for how that affects things downstream? It's really just each department with such a narrow focus on their own interest that never was really considered that could be an issue?
I mean, there's a couple of things here. I think, so it's very difficult. I strongly believed at the time and still believe that, what's called a platform approach is the right way to go, because in principle, every stakeholder involved in a clinical trial can log into that platform and carry out their function. But if you do create a platform, and then, I mean, I'll describe this one particular case. I remember going, I won't say who, but I went to a large pharma company because we had a contact there, and we demonstrated a platform to this director at that large pharma company, and they were bowled over. They thought they said, this is great. There's nothing like this. Is great. Only trouble is you're going to have to convince another 6 directors of different departments that your system's the one to go with. And of course, each department will be in their own life cycle. One of them will be using their Argus or RSG safety system, and this other department will be using this, and so on. To convince each of the departments that the Clinpal system was the way to go was going to be impossible, right? So that sort of put a pin into our bubble. And, at the time it was necessary, maybe naively, to chase after individual silos, unfortunately, and hope that you can win your way into one particular silo and expand from there. But also you have to factor in the timelines. When you're developing a software product, like say for clinical trials, your timelines can be very long. You can speak to a sponsor and they'll go, yeah, we love your software. Right, we're doing a 2-year study. It's not going to kick off for another 6 months. That's 2.5 years. And after we've run that study, then we can maybe talk about a couple more studies. So from a software vendor perspective, you're going, oh my goodness, this is going to take years and years and years. Tell you what we'll do is we'll just stick to our silo, and we'll work away at that. And so you be successful. And then, and this is the kicker here, you get to the end of your cycle and think, great, we're now successful. We've got our successful EDC system, right? We're going to expand, right? And then you look at your product and you go, oh, we've got an EDC system that was developed, 7 years ago. It's not the right technology. Tell you what, we'll keep that to the side, and we're going to use the latest and greatest tech, right? And we'll put a bridge between the old and the new, but we'll maybe create a similar user interface, same logo at the top left. I think it'll be good. It'll be no problem. Marketing department, they'll never know. They'll never know. We'll just charge on. Unfortunately, that does potentially create, build up your silos. And the answer, people say, oh, but the answer is, we can create all these interfaces and no problem. But it's not as simple as that, And to me, it became clear when we sat down and looked at workflow, and it's a boring, tedious title, but when you look at what people do, they follow a flow of activities. And if you require people to go into system A to go looking for what to do and to clear that queue or that stack, and then have to go to system B to work through that queue and clear that stack, and so on and so forth, that's not very efficient in my mind, right? Because there's no definite, the fact you've got 10 items in system A and 10 items in system B doesn't mean you all do the first 10 in system A and then after you've finished it, you do the next 10 in system B and so on. These should be on one stack, right? So you're prioritizing things properly. But that doesn't generally happen because you're going to different systems. They don't have this idea of a stack. And that was, again, what we tried to solve with the Clinpal system. We thought, right, we'll just create one workflow system, right? You'll have single sign-on, one workflow system, and it'll have all the stuff in it, right, in theory, But, right now, even today, the vendors are creating, platforms. They're not really thinking about a sort of workflow and a stack, which is a shame because if you protocols are basically it's a plan. It's like you have your visit schedule, you have your study schedule. It's a flow, right? And the system should almost look at this as a plan and go, yeah, I've got that. I can see what's going to happen. Right, stakeholder, right, you're a site user. Here's what you need to do. Right, patient, here's what you need to do, and just glue it all together. But we don't have that, which I think points to maybe some of the costs and complexities of a clinical trial today. You've got so many stakeholders, and then you've got other stakeholders that are responsible for coordinating your first set of stakeholders because they're not necessarily connected.
Right.
So they're going, ooh, what are you? Hold on a minute. Stop, hold on. I don't know if this person over there is doing what they should do in comparison to you. But so we have lots of checklists and things like that. Putting things into a platform where every activity is coordinated, should potentially solve that. I mean, it sounds complex. Right. It is complex, and it's certainly not easy, but I believe it's possible. And that could lead towards, instead of having 20 sign-ons, you might have 10 sign-ons and then 5 sign-ons and so on. If everyone was using a platform and it was the same platform, then, as a site user, you could log in, you could see, here's a list of all my sponsors, here's a list of all my studies I'm working on.
Right.
Potentially, here's a queue of the things I've got to do today. But as I'm sure you know, you don't have that. So you've got to go, right, I'm now going to work with this sponsor, this study. What do I have to do? I'm now going to work with this sponsor, this study. What do I need to do? And hope that you're pulling up all these things in the right order to tackle what needs to be done in the right, put out the fires before you do the mundane tasks. It must be very challenging. I don't envy you.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite thing, to say the least. So do you think there's, we know there's a lot of new vendors coming to the market right now, and they're building platforms. I mean, but do you think that the challenge still remains with the siloing and the things you describe? I mean, even if you build out the perfect platform, is it still going to be an uphill battle to get that adopted because of the silos? Is it not? It's not a tech problem, right? It's a people problem, if anything. Is that fair to say, you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can still have different departments working with the same system. If you get some, CIO at a big sponsor company going, right, we're going to solve this, and speak to all his reports saying, right, guys, we're going to solve this. You're going to use one platform, right? Then there's an opportunity to change things. But we need a lot more honesty, I think, in this marketplace. I was at a conference last week and we were talking exactly about this. And the issue is, you can speak to 10 vendors and all 10 vendors will say we have a platform, right? Because what's a platform? A platform could start at being we've got a common logo, or you could have a sort of single sign-on. But behind you scrape the surface and you've got 5 products potentially. The vendor, said, oh, we don't want to rate ourselves a CTMS. Oh, we'll buy a CTMS, no problem. Ka-ching, logo, and you think you're done. But in actual fact, you start working on it, you're going, no, we've got sites in this system, and we've got, sites in the CTMS system and sites in the EDC system. Why are the list of sites in 2 different places? They just become broken in synchronization. It doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of that. Even some of the strong companies that make out a platform, there's just different levels of platform. And I think there just needs to be a lot more honest discussion about what that means and where the value is. So, so when you go into a showroom of e-clinical platforms, you go, oh, well, that's 70 out of 100 in the platform scale. That's pretty good. Oh, that's 10 out of 100. And that's what we've got. But you wouldn't know by looking at any of them. You just don't know. It doesn't come clear. The devil's in the detail. But unfortunately, that's the impact on the site. It's pain for sites, because all of a sudden someone's picked a platform that's not really a platform, and you've got all the extra work.
Well, and I think that's especially too what's interesting at the site. The sites don't know. I have no idea. I don't know why anything in particular was chosen, or how it connects to each other, or how it doesn't connect to each other, how it communicates, how it doesn't. I think that's very just confusing at the site level, and we're the ones who have to use them every day. I am not exaggerating when I tell you I've had studies where I don't know which platform to log into to get the subject number. I don't even know where to start. So I've got to go log into 3 different systems and screw around until I figure out, oh, okay, here's how I get assigned a subject number for this study. I mean, that's just, it's crazy to me. So I know that's why I love these types of conversations, because again, sites really have no clue what's going on in the background. And to speak to that, is there not a way to make that sort of a front end for the sites? I don't care what's happening on the back end at the site level. If I have a front end that's, intuitive and a little more cohesive, then hey man, my problem's solved. Now that there still may be another host of problems down the road, but is that a realistic option?
Yeah, I mean, IWS, so the interactive voice or response systems, whatever acronym you want to describe from that.
Right.
Most of them are called randomization and trials, supply systems, right? So quite often these systems are used as a first point of entry because they randomize the patient. So what you might do is you might enter the basic criteria for screening a patient, and then you'd meet these criteria, and then you'd randomize the patient, and then that would be the trigger point to define their drug dispensing profile, and then create that patient in EDC. But as you say, you're thinking, right, do I need to go enter all that data into my RTSM system if I've then got to key in a proportion of that into my EDC system as well? It doesn't seem, what's the point? What's the value for me? And I would confirm that, we should go into one system. It doesn't need to be an EDC system or an RTSM system. You want to key in the details for a patient, right? And you want to key it in, and then you want a system, you don't care which one. You want this system to then randomize that patient and provide the drug supply management for that patient. But again, why take me to another user experience or user interface to force me to have to do that? I'm not asking for that. You're forcing me to do that because it's easier for you, right? So there are interfaces, but the interfaces are hard still. The interfaces are getting better. And I think a lot of companies have been put off interfacing because it is tricky. You go to a programmer and say, could you program this interface? And they start talking about XML and, web services. And they go, oh, this is tricky. Oh, it's complicated. I don't want any of that. I tell you what, we'll use some bodies and we'll throw some bodies at it instead, and that'll be okay. But it does create problems downstream, because if you have people manually entering data in two different places, you're probably going to have someone else checking to make sure it was entered in two different places correctly. And also you've got the downstream, can I trust my dashboard? Do I want a real-time dashboard? Actually, no, I'll not a real-time dashboard because the checking hasn't happened yet. So I'll keep the real-time dashboard till later and make it's not real-time anymore because it's not been checked, it's unchecked data. So it does. So if you want your sort of fully agile clinical trial models, you've got to start interfacing these systems. So anyway, I was saying there are new technologies which are getting better, but it's the metadata which is the key here. The data about data. So you have an RTSM system that will have a definition of a study. You'll have an EDC system as a definition of a study, and the two are not going to speak. They'll send data to each other, but they won't necessarily send metadata. At best, they'll have a report, and someone's going to look and go, yep, I think they line up. Yep. And they'll press this button, and they'll hope not to get an error. But it's the interfacing. There are standards. I mean, some people might have heard of CDISC standards. I was involved in that back 20 plus years ago. And that was trying to solve the problem. But to be honest, I think it should have fixed the cause of the problem rather than trying to patch the effects of the problem. And the concept of platform is trying to resolve the problem, the underlying root problem, rather than to say, well, we've got proliferation of systems, let's try and interface them using these standards. So yeah, unfortunately, sites get the brunt of this, and it doesn't have to be that way. I am certain we can do better. And as I said, I was hoping the patients won't use 5 apps, they won't use 4 apps, they'll use 1 app. And 2 is a problem. 3 is like, forget it. So I was hoping that patients would be the catalyst for that, which is partly why I was pushing so hard for DCT studies. And I still believe in DCT studies, but they won't be DCT. They'll be hybrids. 90. Sure. I mean, I think I said 85%, but that's being generous. I think probably 99% of DCT trials will be hybrid studies, and 1% will be just a decentralized trial with no sites. But so we'll be doing hybrid studies. And that, I think, is an opportunity, but also a possible problem area. It's one of the blogs I posted was this idea of decentralized clinical trial companies will create their decentralized clinical trial systems, but they're not solving the traditional, the EDC, RTSM, So you'll get all the tech for the DCT and all the tech for the traditional, and you'll have to combine them. So sites will be going, you're kidding me on. You've got to be joking here. You're going to give me more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of the sort of anxiety, I think, from the site side. Look, we all want the concept here, which is to, provide some options for patients so they can participate. not having to come on site all the time, but then, are we just creating another layer that's going to further create burden? And, that's, I don't even know what that looks like yet. There aren't even really, at least in my experience, we do a lot of studies, but we haven't really seen that technology out, in the world quite yet to know what that's going to mean. Is it going to get worse before it gets better?
No, I mean, I'm cross my fingers that it's going to get better. I mean, there's been a couple of regulatory articles. I think they're both sort of draft or guidelines, but one from the FDA and one from EMA, talking about the investigator's responsibility for the patient data, right?
Yeah.
From one perspective, it was talking about more the safety. So if a patient was reporting like a SUSAR, that it was investigator responsible for owning that, which you could easily read as reviewing that, which means they have to get that data, right? And if they're reviewing it, there's got to be a record that they reviewed that. Okay, so this old idea that ePro was almost going in its own sort of thread, the own stream, and the investigator sort of saw it, but they didn't need to worry about it. I think that's going to go. And I fully agree with that, but also I like it because it means it's got to keep this stuff together. So instead of two systems, you could say, no, it's got to be one. So you've got EDC and ePro, just one system. You don't have to worry about interfacing and all that. It's one system, right? And if you look at some of the other DCT activities, teleconferencing or video conferencing, should I say, e-consent, these are all part of, to me, the ecosystem. And if you're going to make one system for the patient, then why not just a one system for the site?
It makes too much sense, maybe. Let me ask you this: is there surely clinical trials and the clinical trial industry is not so unique that there's not? I mean, are there other industries that have tackled problems like this and have been more successful, or is it? I mean, truly kind of unique to what we do? Because there's all kinds of consumer tech and other tech out there. I mean, is there a roadmap maybe that we're not looking to that we could be?
I mean, I think we should be, and we're not. I think there's a number of reasons for that. The timeline I mentioned, things are stretched out over long periods of time. Commercial organizations that use, ERP systems, they change quickly because someone will say, no, this is time and money. This has got to happen. This has got to change. Make it better, make it better, make it better. And I think we're not getting that. And also, I think there's a sensitivity and nervousness to publicly discussing failures. So no vendor is going to go, yep, sorry, terrible bug, terrible. We lost all that data. It's terrible. Nobody's going to say that. But unfortunately, on the other side, sponsors are not going to say, oh, we ran this trial and my goodness, was it a disaster? My goodness, we lost all. So nobody's honest, unfortunately, because they're scared. They're scared that, something's going to come back. And unfortunately, that hides problems that should be fixed, I mean, I'm talking from the tech side of things.
Sure.
If I have a problem, or if other vendor has a problem, I'd love to read about it and go, oh, right, yeah, you're right. Okay, let's not do that. That didn't work. You guys learned from that. But it's just so risk averse, and it just masks the problem. So I can guarantee there will be graduates coming out of universities and colleges, running into these big DCT companies, making the same problems that I made 20 years ago. Because nobody's able to talk about them.
Yeah, then that is unfortunate. And again, seems a lot more encouraged in other industries. And I think you did make a post that it, kind of encouraged me to start thinking that way in terms of sharing failures. So, I mean, how else are we going to get through this thing? It's crazy. So let me ask you this too. This is maybe a bit of a stretch, but do you feel let me back up a little bit. Whenever these systems are sort of getting cobbled together in a way, is this decisions usually coming from the CRO versus the sponsor making these tech decisions? I guess, is it more on the CRO side who's bringing that or driving that?
I mean, I think if any of the CROs, they want consistency. They're providing a service, and it's harder to provide a service if the technology is changing from study to study to study. I'm a massive advocate of this idea of an effective solution, whether it's a clinical trial or anything else. An effective solution is a combination of technology, process, and people. Right.
Right.
You've heard that banded around, but I think it's really important, especially in clinical trials, and especially actually the latest clinical trial technologies. The latest clinical trial technologies have workflow built into them, which is great. Right.
Right.
And the workflow says this user does this, and then that role does that, and then that. Okay, so that's the step of things. Now, you then look at an SOP and it says either something different or doesn't say anything at all. I'm going, why are you? You've got basically a process control system, an electronic process control system. The SOPs should match that, right? Now, imagine if you take away that system and you put something else in. All of a sudden, you've got a breakdown from what your staff are trained in and what the process says from what the system does. So you're in a tricky position, and I think a lot of CROs have gone, can't really solve that. Tell you what, we'll make generic high-level SOPs, which basically don't say anything of any great value. All they allow the CROs just to pass audit. That's it, but they don't have really any business value. But I think that's a missed opportunity. Like a good SOP is good business. It's good. It's a good method of working, and that's what you should really have. And so maybe, maybe talking way ahead, maybe it's going to be 10, 15 years. Maybe we'll get rid of SOPs and it'll be the process in these systems is what happens. And maybe it's a better representation than words in legal type words in an SOP document.
Sure. No, that's interesting. Well, I was trying to get to is, do you feel, these DCT companies that are, ostensibly creating a all-encompassing platform, do you think that provides any sort of opportunity for them to sort of maybe even supplant CROs or to sort of eke into the CRO space as a, if their platform is, truly all-encompassing, can do so many things. I mean, could you build a CRO on top of that and sort of start fresh in a way? Is that a pipe dream to say, or is that outside the realm of possibility?
Well, there's a few issues here. So first of all, these systems, in order to work, they need to be what's called configurable, right?
Right.
Which could also be described as incomplete, right? But, that's maybe doing a disservice. I'm a big fan of configurable systems and what these configurable systems do, and there's platforms out there already I would class as configurable. Somebody has to tell them what to do, and that can be down at the study by study level, right? Now, you see that in EDC system, you go in, you build your ECRF forms, you put your logic in there, but that's extending to your CTMS systems, that's extending to your ETMF systems, where you're having to say, for this study, this is what we're going to do. Now, to me, that's where the likes of a CRO should be. It should be going, yep, I've got the knowledge of what we're going to do for this study. Vendors, back off, you write the software, we will run it for this study.
They configure.
Right? I don't think the DCT vendors are going to be scaling to be deeply involved in every study. That's maybe where the early EDC companies were. The early EDC companies had EDC tools that weren't very mature, and they would go, oh, I'll build it, because it wasn't ready to be built by anyone else.
Gotcha.
But, my experience actually with metadata was, come 2007, the bulk of studies were then built by CROs. So I see the same with DCT. The DCT companies will write DCT software. They'll be the subject matter experts. They'll be the tech providers. They'll run this software as a service, but it still has to be configured. And that's where the digital CROs, I think, will come.
Gotcha. So, and just, this is my own ignorance here, but it's like building a Squarespace website, right? Like the EDC says, here's Squarespace, and you build out each study individually. So you've got the generic, and it gets configured individually for each study by the CRO.
Yeah. But I think it's even more to that, because every CRO, I'll talk for KCR right now. We build, it's almost like templates. Okay. Right. So instead of starting from a study and going, right, we're going from 0 to 100 and then we're going to run it, we have predefined templates, checklists, whether it's project management, ETMF or EDC. We've got these templates. so that we can go, no, we can start faster.
Right.
Right. And that's, I think, the way things are going. You go to these big vendors, like Viva, like Medidata to some extent. You go to them and they will provide a standard platform, but you could say that's lowest common denominator,
Sure.
to be cruel. But they're saying this will work for everyone. But then you have to take that and say, right, well, hold on, we're doing oncology studies and we're doing this and we're doing that, and this is where we operate, and therefore we need to take it to the next level to make it applicable to these types of studies. And I think there'll be a lot more of that done. But that's maybe one of the drawbacks, but also the advantages of a platform is that they will be more configured. You see this in other industries where you buy like SAP. It's the same with SAP. SAP is like an ERP system, enterprise resource planning tool, and you'll buy the software, and then for the next 2 years you'll do all the work to get it all set up for your business, and then you'll start to turn the handle. You're turning the handle, and it's it's running the business. It's running the business, and I think we need a bit more of that in clinical trials. You get them in, you set up your platform, you then work with it in the operational level, and you're not rebuilding it every time. You're doing less and less to make it work for your particular trial. So that's where I think things will go. I think maybe it's not there yet, but I think it has to be there. And I think sites. I'm just asking, actually. I'm not speaking to you as the only site, but I'm saying, please keep talking about, we don't want a proliferation of systems for our studies, because it's not good for anyone. And I think patient advocates should say the same. But I want one mobile app, and I want it to run on my mobile. I don't want to be given a mobile device. Forget that.
Right. Yeah, that's a terrible reality we still deal with, is handing out that old Android phone that on its last leg that can't connect, to Wi-Fi half the time, and that's a mess.
I worked on a rescue study just for that case. It was a contraception study, and the patients were asked to carry around it was an old Android phone in addition to their iPhone.
Right.
Can you imagine how annoying that was? You're doing your daily diary for a year, carrying around this phone looking for 2 charge points instead of 1.
Right.
It wasn't going to happen. You might last a few weeks.
I tell people I'm shocked that patients are compliant. I mean, we're asking them to do something that's completely ludicrous, and they'll still do it. So I mean, I give them a ton of credit for that, but I'm just blown away when people will carry around 2 phones, 2 different chargers. You have to laugh to keep from crying, because it's just so silly. So what do you think? I mean, what's the future? Like, what's the ideal future to you in terms of these platforms or tech stacks or whatever the best terminology is? What do you hope to see as we get a little further down the road here?
So, I think platforms will evolve. It does take a long time, and that is, you could have discussions on LinkedIn. I can still find discussions on LinkedIn, and the term best of breed will be banded around, and there'll be probably right now 50-50 between best of breed is better than platform. Now, the term best of breed is that you go to your safety vendor, and they provide your safety software, and it's classified as best of breed because it's been developed for the last 20 years, right? And I know what's there. And the challenge for the vendors, I'll say some of them, like Oracle Argus has been around for a long time. And if you're capturing safety data, Oracle Argus is a good tool to use. And it's been around 20 plus years. Now, once there's a new product which can compete with that, that's great. In the meantime, Oracle Argus is what's classified as best of breed. Once it's in the platform, then people will go, I entered my adverse event into my ECRF, and I didn't even blink, and it's a case in the safety system. It's brilliant, And people will go, hallelujah! Why didn't this happen before? Why didn't this happen before? It's crazy. I don't know why it didn't happen before, but that's the case, and it'll just take a long time. But I'm blogging and talking about this idea of platforms just because I think the idea of what a real platform is not well understood, and therefore it's not sought. People will go, well, you've got a platform, I'll take your platform. But in most cases, it's not a platform and they won't see the benefits. So I want to get across to any buyers that are interested as CRO or sponsors that a platform is this, and this is what it will do, and this is why you should have it. And this is how you identify one platform for another, or one lack of a platform for another lack of a platform. And hopefully over time, if I'm right, I could be completely wrong, of course, but if I'm right, vendors and buyers will come together saying, okay, I've now got a real platform, and I, to single sign on, and you only have to enter your data once, and we've got one consolidated master list of activities and and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, to say it's complex is an understatement. If you work with multiple sponsors, even with the same platform today, you may have separate logins because, single sign-on is not necessarily always single sign-on. When they talk about single sign-on, they might be saying, okay, when you work with me, pharma, ABC Pharma, I'm going to give you a single sign-on, which is at ABC's Pharma's single sign-on, but when the next pharma comes along, they've got another sign-on to the same system that they'll give to you.
Multiple single sign-ons.
Yeah. And I think it's up to the vendors to go. Actually, I laugh a bit about it now, but if you think about the patient, patients do get involved in multiple clinical trials, and it's almost like an ownership thing. And I think the same will apply to sites. I think the patients should say, no, this is my login. If you want to work with me in a clinical trial, I'm going to log in with my Google account. That's it, right? You come to me, right? And I think the same could be said for the sites. You come to me. This is how I'm going to log into my system. And I think things might switch around because the tech is there, but it's more of a mindset thing. It's almost going back to the old days of client-server technologies in the 90s where, big pharma would have their big database in their office and everybody would connect into it. And there's that mindset is still there. Even though we're using single instance cloud systems, people are still going, no, this is my silo. Right. Not really realizing actually the silo is in the same physical database, physical server that, this other pharma company's got. But, I think there's a mindset change that needs to be applied, that it's all in the same place. It's all secure. It doesn't have to be physically separated anymore.
Right. No, I love that. I'm going to shift gears real quickly, if that's okay. One thing I like to ask, all the guests that come on, any tools, tricks, tips, what's something you'd share with the audience that sort of helps you, manage your day-to-day or sort of be the best you can be? It doesn't have to be research related, but just anything. What's something you'd share?
I have to say I've used task managers. Many different task managers, and I have to say I probably change task managers frequently. I've got something here. It's called a notebook, right? It's got paper, right? And I scribbled something down on there. And I think, to be honest, the reason I scribble on there is just because it's there. It's I'm an absolute techie. I use a lot of software all the time, but it's almost like there's, just because it's a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil doesn't actually make it the worst user experience. Sometimes that is actually the best user experience. And I think we should always think, right, regardless of tech or not tech, what is the best user experience?
Right.
And if that turns out to be something that's old-fashioned, a piece of paper, yeah, fine, it's the best user experience. Why not? We shouldn't be too geeky about it has to be tech.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've for a long time shunned the notebook, but I've recently tried to do, like some simple bullet journaling and find that it's so much easier. I can just have it open right in front of me, jot down what I need to, and I'm good to go. So I actually appreciate that from a tech guy. Well, I love it. Where can people find you online, Doug?
So I do post on LinkedIn and Medium right now. So you can look me up. Just Google for Doug Bain at KCR. You could probably find my profile. I'm happy to connect to most people. unless you're trying to sell me something. But yeah, I also post on Medium. And yeah, I do post quite a few blogs, but I do feel strongly that any blog I post is there to be challenged. Okay, the idea as a post is because I want for people to come back to me saying, no, I disagree, and then we have a discussion, and out of that, hopefully both of us are enlightened. Either I was wrong or I was right, and the other person goes, right, okay. And I think that dialogue of good and bad will help, move things forward.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's nice to see some true engagement online rather than people just spamming, thinly veiled sales material. So I appreciate that very much. I'll make sure that we drop your contact info on the website with show notes. And man, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this has been really illuminating to me from the site side. Again, not sort of knowing how a lot of this stuff works in the background. So again, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Matt.
As always, thanks so much for listening to Note to File Podcast. Make sure and check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for episode transcripts, show notes, as well as guest contact info. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What else would you like to hear on the show? If you have any guest requests or specific topics you'd like to see covered, feel free to reach out. It's Brad at notetofilepodcast.com. Thanks, guys.